Back in high school, I wanted to earn some extra money because I wanted to buy my own car. At the time, I actually had just got my license, and I was 16 years old when this all happened. And I didn't know what to do for to earn some extra money, but then some of my friends actually did tell me that they were doing some babysitting jobs and it was well paid. I thought, why not? So I did ask my parents for permission about this, and they said it was okay because it turned out my mom also did some babysitting when she was in my age. And I was like, okay. So, so, at least that was taken care of. But not shortly afterwards, my mom introduced me my first official babysitting job for a friend of hers, a coworker, Mrs. Carter. Mr. Carter was actually in her 40s, like my mom. She has two kids, Ryan, 10, Teresa, 8. She was a single mother, and their mom was about to leave the town for a few hours for a meeting, and so she had asked my mom if I could look after her kids for a few hours, and it's like, and since this was on a Friday, and I have no school the next day, so I was like, why not? So I went over to their home with my mom, introduced myself to Ryan and Teresa. Teresa was a little bit shy because after all she was only 8. Ryan, he was more like the man in the house. He was more braver. But after a while, after their mom told me their schedule, like things what they were allowed to do and not allowed to do, and especially what time they were supposed to be eating dinner and what time they got to bed around 8:30 p.m. So after that was finished taken care of, she left and I went in the living room with both Ryan and Teresa. We just watched some TV, played some games, had dinner around 7 p.m. After dinner, we went back to the living room, just watched some more games, played some more games and watched some TV. But it wasn't until like 8 p.m. when suddenly there was a knock on the door. I was like, Mrs. Carter would have mentioned if she was having someone over. So I went to the door and I didn't open it though because I didn't trust. I had a gut feeling that something was wrong. After all, their mom would have mentioned if she would have someone over. And this was not like a delivery boy. I mean, there's no. I mean, if they would have delivered something, their mom would have mentioned as well. So I asked by the door who it is, and it was a man. Assuming at least a man in his 40s, like their Mrs. Carter is. And I asked him why he's there, and he wanted to see his kids. His kids, I thought. But I knew that Mr. Carter was single mother, but I didn't know that she was even had never been married or if the kid's dad was even still around. So I looked at both Ryan and Teresa, and to my shocking, Teresa was hugging her older brother, looking so scared, and even Ryan, who was brave, now was shaking while hugging his sister. I didn't know what it was going on here. I told him, the man, give me a moment, and then I walked over to Ryan and asked, by bending down so that I was in his eyes, asked him if he knew this man. He nodded shakingly and said that is his dad, but he wasn't allowed to come over. I asked why. Because he was a bad man, he said. I asked what he actually meant by bad man. He said that his mom was being beaten by their dad, and that was when he wasn't allowed to come over or even see them. That didn't hit me. When he was mentioned bad man but his beat hitting their mom, it just mentioned. It just clearly hit me. Turned out, their mom were in fact in a marriage relationship with their dad at one point. And he started being abusing to her both mentally and physically. He was only verbally abusing their kids. He never laid a hand on them. but only that made them so terrified. And I understand it was no way I would let this man inside. And as about to go to telling that when I went back to the door, he started knocking again, but this time more friendly, almost demanding that I let him inside. I told him firmly that he is not allowed to tell him to go, or I would call the police. But that made him even more furious. He started just slamming himself against the door, demanding that I open the door, or else. Or else, or else what? I said. Or I will beat you so badly that you won't be recognized for months, he said. I didn't hesitate to just told Teresa and Ryan run upstairs to their mom's bedroom, and they did, and I was run after them. And I was terrified. I locked the door, and I put the dresser in front of the door just as a barricaded as an extra precaution. And at the time when I just grabbed my phone, started calling for 911, I heard the front door, burst open, and he started yelling, screaming to let me see my kids. He screamed. I can hear that he was trashing downstairs, smashing pieces, or I don't know what they were doing, but it turned out he was smashing like the TV screen, some games that he had, and even the operator on the phone could actually hear this going on. They told me that the police were all on the way and they will be there in a few minutes. Just stay in the bedroom, make sure the door's locked and is protected, and protect the kids no matter what. While I was waiting for the police, I could still hear their dad downstairs smashing, screaming, yelling to let him see his kids. I then actually decided to call Mrs. Carter just to inform her what's been happening. She was horrified when I mentioned that her ex-husband was apparently in the house. She demanded to know where the kids are. I told them that they are with me, and I called the police and they will be here in a minute or so. She told me that she will be there as soon as she could. And as that happened, I heard loud steps up for the staircase up to the bedroom, and he was outside the door, screaming, yelling, and that made both the kids just so more terrified. They both screamed that they didn't want to see him. Ryan screamed so loud, saying to his dad, "You're not my dad anymore. Leave. You're a monster." That made his dad even furious and like, "How dare you say that to me, boy?" And then he started slamming against the bedroom door, but since it was locked and a dresser in front of it, it was only a matter of time before he would get in. I was hoping and hoping that the police would arrive soon enough. But to my horror, the door started getting away from his weight of his slamming. I was hoping the police would be there just in time. And as it was getting to looking very dark for all this happening, I could hear from the bedroom window and seeing the flashing lights of red and blue of the police sirens. I was like, thank goodness they're here. And it didn't take long for police just ran in the door and ran upstairs, told the man to drop the weapon, and it turned out he had a knife from the kitchen. Apparently he was going to kill me because I was in his way for his kids. Because in his mind he was a better parent than his ex-wife. Because in his mind that his ex-wife had kidnapped his kids and that he was the one that was supposed to be given the custody and not her. And since I was there, preventing him from getting his kids, he would take me out of the way by meaning to no matter what happened, even if it meant that he killed me. But the police tased the man, handcuffed him, and put him in a squad car. After that, just what happened, Mr. Carter came home. She rushed into her kids' arms, and they were just happy to see that they were safe. She thanked me for being their hero, and both Teresa and Ryan thanked me as well. I was, I was in a high rush of adrenaline at the time. But after all this event happened, it was over. I fell to the ground on my knees, and I was so exhausted. My mom also showed up because it turned out Mrs. Carter had called her because she was so worried about me and about my safety when got a call that her friend's ex-husband was at the house, and they didn't know how things would turn out. But it later turned out that her ex-husband was this abusive well, and he was had a restraining order against him. But after all this ordeal was taken care of, he was taken back to jail, and he was in there for at least a large number of years. And what happened to Mrs. Carter and Ryan and Teresa? Did they leave? No. They stayed in the house, and I continued to babysit for both Ryan and Teresa because they saw me as a hero. And I didn't want to just let this all happen, to just let it go. I guess I loved them. I saw them like my own, like my younger siblings. And in fact, even to this day, I'm still very much still in contact with Mrs. Carter and her kids, and we see each other from time to time. And it happens that we do in fact talk about this particular event, and it's it was one of the most horrifying times that I could have lost my own life, and that both Ryan and Teresa could have vanished without a trace. And their dad is still behind bars, and he might not even keep me out at all. So for this, I'm glad that both Ryan and Teresa are safe and sound. I have a terrifying story that will both be shocking and scaring for all of you, and it is the only time that it really scared me so badly. I have been doing babysitting since I started high school and even after high school. My name is Riley. I'm 20 years old, and this is the only time that really scared me into beyond terror that I even imagined it would happen. During the summer, I was asked by a neighbor if I could look after her two daughters, um, Mia, 8, Amanda, 5. And I had looked after her daughters before a few times, so there was nothing new, and they knew me well enough. And they even called me Big Sister Riley, and it was just adorable. I mean, I see them as my younger sisters as well. So, and there was nothing like I said, there's nothing new about their schedule, what time they ate, and something like that. And since she came over to ask me, and I was still living with my parents at the time, though, just saying. And this was early noon, and since it was early, I thought, why not just go to the park nearby just for a few hours, and we did. Afterwards, we went back to their house, and we were actually playing in the backyard for a few hours more, and then, but it wasn't until in the evening, just shortly after we had dinner, there was a knock on the door. I was like, who can it be? And turned out there was a man in his 40s, I believe, and he did introduce himself as Mr. Thomas. Then I realized, Mr. Thomas. I recognized the name, and I do I recognize the man because he only lived a few houses down from my house, and he was the next door neighbor to Amanda and Mia's house. So I was like, okay. He offered to help me to look after the girls, but I told her this. I told him it's fine. I have all this covered. I have looked after them before, and there's nothing to be worried. But he was insistent. But I said firmly I didn't have any. I didn't need any extra help. And he said, nodded, okay, went back home. But it didn't take less than an hour later where there was another knock on the door, and who was it another than Mr. Thomas? He came back with a plate with some cookies on it. He wanted to give these cookies for the girls and was again asked if I needed help. But now I persisted to be saying, no, I don't need any extra help. I mean, I can handle this myself, said firmly, with more calmly and kindly to him. But he said, still persisted that that I need his help. But I told him I didn't need his help. So I told him just go home, and he did. And I thought that was the last I saw him, at least for this evening. And boy, was I wrong though. Because not only a few hours later, this was around maybe, I think it was around 7:30-ish, around that time, there was another knock on the door. And who was it other than Mr. Thomas? I was getting tired of this instant nonsense. He told me that he needed to be helping me with the kids. I told him that I didn't need any help because I was preparing to get into bed soon, and that's why I didn't need his help. But now he said firmly, with almost an angry tone, "You need my help." I got startled. This was the first time I ever seen like this from like his reaction. And even the girls who were standing in the living room heard this. And Mia, she was only 8. She looked scared. Amanda, who was only 5, started crying up and so scared, startled at this man. And it made him just like, "Oh, you be quiet." And I was like, "You don't say that to the girls." I told them to just leave or I will call the police. That made him even more furious. And he tried to barge in, but I managed to push him off the steps and slammed the door, locked it, and deadbolted it. He slammed his hand against the door, screaming, "Let me help! Let me help!" I then said no, and I called the police. But he didn't leave. I didn't call the police. They heard it on the phone what he was doing. And they sent at least one squad car over, and the man didn't even listen to them. He just slammed his hand and started kicking the door. And I even called their mom. And, well, let's say, turned out he had some mental problems. And, like, really problems. Like, he had this dementia or something, and some anger issues. And that combination was not a good thing because police took him away, and I later found out that he was put in this sort of home for a home for special care. I was sorry for him though. This was nothing like I didn't wish for my worst enemy, but I just, well, let's say I was just hoping that he could get the help that he needed. And you may think this is the last time I ever looked after Amanda and Mia. Oh no. I did continue to look after them even if I moved out. Because they saw me as like a big sister. And even as they were getting older, and when they reached the point they didn't need a babysitter anymore, I still looked after them, or at least talked to them for a few times, and they still called me as their sister, which is just adorable. So there are two, Mr. Thomas, I hope you get the help you needed, and I'm just happy that the both girls were safe.